Grace Harper had always loved the quiet hours before the library opened. There was something peaceful about walking through the old building when it was still dark outside, hearing only the sound of her footsteps on the wooden floors. She'd been working at Thornfield Public Library for nearly 8 years now, and every morning felt the same, predictable, safe. That Tuesday morning in late October, everything changed. She unlocked the heavy front doors at 6:30, just like always. The building was over 100 years old, with tall ceilings and rows of dark wooden shelves that seemed to stretch on forever. The smell of old books and furniture polish filled the air. Grace flipped on the lights in the main reading room and headed toward the back section where people rarely went. That's where they kept the really old books, the ones about local history and family trees. Someone had returned a stack of genealogy books the day before, and Grace needed to put them back on the shelves. She was carrying about 5 heavy volumes when she heard it, a soft sound almost like a kitten mewing. She stopped walking and listened. There it was again. Definitely not a kitten. Her heart started beating faster. Grace set the books down on a nearby table and walked slowly toward the sound. It was coming from behind the tall shelf in the corner, the one that held the rare book collection. They kept that section roped off because some of those books were worth thousands of dollars. As she got closer, the sound got louder. It was crying. A baby crying. Her hands were shaking as she moved around the shelf. And there, sitting on the floor in a wicker basket, was a tiny baby. A real, living, breathing newborn baby, wrapped in what looked like an expensive cream-colored silk blanket. The baby's face was red from crying, little fists waving in the air. Grace stood there frozen for a moment, her mind trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Who would leave a baby in a library? How did they even get in? She'd locked up herself the night before. She was the first one here this morning. This didn't make any sense. She knelt down next to the basket, her librarian instincts kicking in even though this was way beyond anything she'd ever dealt with. The baby looked healthy, clean, well cared for. The blanket was beautiful, with tiny embroidered flowers along the edges. This wasn't some desperate situation where a mother had no other choice. This was planned, careful. That's when Grace noticed the book. Right next to the basket, placed carefully on the floor, was an old leather-bound book she'd never seen before. It wasn't one of theirs. The cover was dark brown, cracked with age, with gold decorations pressed into the leather. There was a family crest on the front, a shield with 2 lions and a crown. The kind of thing you'd see in movies about old royal families. Grace picked up the baby, who immediately stopped crying. The little one couldn't have been more than a few days old. She held the infant close, feeling the tiny heartbeat, and looked around the empty library. No one was there. No note taped to the basket. No explanation. Just this baby and this strange old book. With one hand holding the baby, Grace carefully opened the book with the other. The pages were yellowed and delicate, covered in handwritten text in old-fashioned script. The title page read, "Lineage of House Ashworth" in elaborate letters. Below that, a date, 1687. This book was over 300 years old. She was about to flip through more pages when she noticed something tucked into the basket's lining. A piece of paper folded small. Grace set the book down and pulled out the note. It was written in blue ink on expensive stationery, just a few lines in neat handwriting. She belongs to the legacy. Keep her safe. The truth is in the pages. Grace read it 3 times, each time feeling more confused and worried. She needed to call someone. The police, definitely. Child services. But something made her hesitate. Whoever left this baby here had chosen this library specifically, had chosen that exact spot next to the rare books, had left this ancient family history book with the child. This wasn't random. She walked to her desk in the main office, still holding the sleeping baby, and dialed 911. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears as she explained the situation. The dispatcher seemed just as shocked as Grace felt. "Ma'am, you're saying you found an abandoned infant?" "Yes, in the genealogy section. There's a baby, maybe 2 or 3 days old. She seems healthy. But someone left her here overnight. We're sending officers right away." "Is the child breathing normally?" Grace looked down at the peaceful little face. "Yes, she's fine. She's sleeping now." "And you're sure you're alone in the building?" That question sent a chill down Grace's spine. She hadn't thought about that. What if whoever left the baby was still in the library somewhere? She glanced around the office nervously. "I think so. I unlocked the doors myself this morning. Everything was locked up tight last night. The dispatcher told her to stay on the line, but Grace heard sirens approaching within minutes. Small-town police could respond quickly, especially to something like this. Soon the library was full of people. Police officers, paramedics, a woman from Child Protective Services. Everyone was asking questions Grace couldn't answer. Detective Owen Chen was the one who seemed most interested in the book. He was younger than Grace expected for a detective, maybe in his early 30s, with dark hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss anything. While the paramedics checked the baby, he pulled on a pair of white gloves and carefully examined the old volume. "Have you ever seen this before?" he asked Grace. "Never. It's not from our collection. Someone brought it and left it with her." "Ashworth," he read aloud, studying the crest. "That name mean anything to you?" Grace thought about it. There used to be an Ashworth family around here. Big estate outside of town, but that was a long time ago. Maybe 60 or 70 years? The place has been empty for as long as I can remember. Owen's eyebrows went up. "Empty? A whole estate?" "It's all overgrown now, locked up. There were legal problems with the inheritance or something. My grandmother used to talk about it. The Ashworths were one of the richest families in the county back in the day." The detective made notes in a small notebook. Meanwhile, the woman from Child Services had taken the baby and was preparing to leave. Grace felt a strange reluctance to let the infant go. She'd only held her for maybe 40 minutes, but something about this whole situation felt important, personal, even though it had nothing to do with her. "Can I see that note again?" Owen asked. Grace handed him the piece of paper. He read it several times, just like she had. "Someone wants you to figure something out," he said quietly. "They left this baby where you'd find her. Left this book as a clue. Why do you think that is?" "I have no idea. I'm just a librarian." "But you work with genealogy records, right? Family histories?" Grace nodded slowly. "We have one of the best local history collections in the state. People come from all over to research their family trees." Owen looked at the book again, then at Grace. "Whoever did this knew that. They knew you'd understand the significance of this book. They're counting on you to piece this together." As everyone started to leave, Grace stood in the quiet library once more. The basket was still there on the floor, empty now. The book sat on her desk, waiting. She had a feeling her peaceful mornings were about to get a lot more complicated, and somewhere out there a mother had just made the hardest decision of her life. Grace picked up the old book and carried it to her desk. She had work to do. Grace couldn't focus on her regular work that day. The library was busier than usual because word had spread about the abandoned baby. People kept coming in, asking questions, wanting to know details. By lunchtime, there were even a few news reporters standing outside. Grace avoided them all and locked herself in the back office with the Ashworth book. Detective Owen Chen had given her permission to examine it, as long as she wore gloves and documented everything. He said the book might be evidence, but he also admitted they had no idea what crime had actually been committed. Leaving a baby somewhere safe wasn't exactly illegal if the mother genuinely couldn't care for the child. But the whole thing felt deliberate, planned, like someone was trying to tell a story. Grace carefully opened the book to the first page. The handwriting was beautiful but hard to read. Old English script from the 1600s, faded brown ink on paper that felt like cloth. She'd handled plenty of old documents before, so she knew to be patient. Each page had to be turned slowly, gently. The book started with a man named Thomas Ashworth, born in England in 1665. It listed his marriage to a woman named Anne, their children, and their decision to leave England for America in 1701. As Grace read through the pages, she realized this wasn't just a family tree, it was a complete history. Births, deaths, marriages, but also stories. Little notes in the margins about family events. Pressed flowers marking special occasions. Tiny sketches of the family estate. By page 50, the Ashworth family had established themselves in America. They'd bought land, built a manor house, and made a fortune in shipping and textiles. Each generation seemed wealthier than the last. Grace found mentions of the estate she'd told Owen about. Ashworth Manor, built in 1789, sitting on 200 acres of prime land. But around 1920, something changed. The notes became darker. A family member died young. Another disappeared without explanation. There was a fire that destroyed part of the manor. Financial troubles were mentioned. By 1950, the entries became sparse and sad. Grace was so absorbed in reading that she jumped when someone knocked on the office door. It was Owen carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop next door. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. "Find anything interesting?" Grace showed him what she'd been reading. This family had everything, and then it all fell apart. "Look at this entry from 1955. Owen leaned over to read where Grace was pointing. Someone had written in shaky handwriting, "Victoria is gone. May God forgive us for what we've done." "Victoria," Owen repeated. "That name's come up in my research too." Victoria Ashworth was the last person to officially live at the manor. She disappeared in 1995. She would have been in her mid-20s at the time. Grace looked up at him. "Disappeared? Like no one ever found her?" "There was a police report filed by her uncle, guy named Robert Ashworth. He claimed Victoria left in the middle of the night and never came back. But here's the interesting part." Owen pulled out his phone and showed Grace some notes. "Robert Ashworth is still alive. He's 73 years old, lives in a condo downtown. I called him this morning." "What did he say?" "He hung up on me. Then his lawyer called back and said Mr. Ashworth has no comment about any baby or any book and we should leave him alone." Owen smiled grimly. When someone lawyers up that fast, it usually means they're hiding something. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. She turned back to the book, flipping carefully through more pages. Near the back, she found a section that had been added more recently. The paper was different, newer. Someone had continued the family record into the 1990s, and there was Victoria, born 1970, only child of Edward and Margaret Ashworth. The entry said she inherited the entire estate when her parents died in a car accident in 1989. But after that, the entry stopped. No marriage, no children, just a blank space where her life should have continued. "Owen, look at this." Grace pointed to something written in pencil in the margin next to Victoria's name. It was so faint she almost missed it. "Just 2 words, she knows what." Owen muttered. Grace kept turning pages. Right at the very end of the book, she found something that made her gasp. It was a photograph, old and faded, tucked between the last page and the back cover. The photo showed a young woman, maybe 20 years old, standing in front of a huge house. She had dark hair and was wearing jeans and a sweater, smiling at the camera. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Victoria, last day at the manor, October 1995. Owen took the photo carefully. "She looks happy here. Doesn't look like someone planning to disappear." "What if she didn't disappear by choice?" Grace said quietly. "What if something happened to her?" They both sat there thinking about that. Owen's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression changed. "The DNA results came back on the baby," he said, reading the message. "This is weird. The lab says the infant has genetic markers that are extremely rare, the kind of markers that show up in very old family lines, European aristocratic families specifically." Grace looked at the Ashworth crest on the book cover, the lions and the crown. Like an aristocratic family that came to America in the 1700s? Exactly like that. For the next hour, they worked together. Grace searched through the library's local history archives while Owen made phone calls and searched police databases. They discovered that the Ashworth estate had been in legal limbo for 30 years. When Victoria disappeared, Robert Ashworth had tried to claim it, saying his niece was dead. But without a body or a death certificate, the courts wouldn't rule. The property just sat there, slowly falling apart, waiting for an heir who might never return. Grace found old newspaper articles about the family. The Ashworths had been prominent in town for generations. They'd donated money to build the hospital. The library's rare book room was funded by an Ashworth grant in 1952. But after 1995, the name disappeared from public records entirely. "It's like someone erased them," Grace said, spreading old newspapers across a table. Owen was looking at something on his laptop. "I've been checking missing persons reports from 1995. Nothing filed for Victoria Ashworth except by Robert. But look at this." He turned the screen so Grace could see. 6 months after Victoria disappeared, a woman matching her description was admitted to a hospital in another state using a fake name. "She was pregnant. How did you find that?" "I didn't. A friend of mine in the FBI did. They've been tracking unusual patterns in identity fraud. This woman had a baby, a girl, in June 1996. Then she vanished again. The hospital records were flagged because she paid cash for everything and refused to provide real identification." Grace did the math in her head. If Victoria had a baby in 1996, That child would be 29 years old now. Old enough to have a baby of her own, Owen added softly. They looked at each other as the pieces started falling into place. The baby in the library wasn't Victoria's child. She was Victoria's grandchild. Someone in the Ashworth line had survived, hidden away for almost 30 years, and now that person had made a choice to reveal the truth by leaving her own baby, where someone would understand the significance. Grace's phone rang. It was her colleague Beth who was watching the front desk. "Grace, there's someone here asking for you. A woman. She won't give her name, but she says it's about the baby." Grace and Owen exchanged glances. "We'll be right there," Grace said. They hurried to the front of the library. A young woman stood near the checkout desk looking nervous and exhausted. She was in her late 20s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing jeans and an old jacket. When she saw Grace and Owen approaching, she looked like she might run. "Are you the librarian who found the baby?" she asked Grace, her voice shaking. "Yes, I'm Grace." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Is she okay?" "The baby, is she safe?" "She's healthy," Owen said gently. "Child Services has her in a good foster home temporarily. Can you tell us who you are?" The woman looked around the library as if checking for someone watching. "My name is Lily Moore, and I need to know if you found the book." "The old book with the family crest. Did you find it?" Grace nodded slowly. "We found it. The Ashworth family history." Lily closed her eyes in relief. "Thank God, then maybe you can help me. Because someone is trying to kill me and my daughter, and that book is the only thing that can prove why." The library suddenly felt very quiet. Owen stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his badge. "Ms. Moore, I'm Detective Chen. Why don't we go somewhere private where we can talk? And you can start by telling us who you really are." Lily looked at both of them, then at the book Grace was still carrying. She took a deep breath. "My mother's name was Victoria Ashworth. She spent her whole life hiding from her family. And now that she's gone, they're coming for me. That baby you found? She's my daughter. And she's the last true heir to the Ashworth fortune. That's why I had to hide her. Because in my family, being an heir is the most dangerous thing you can be." They moved to the library's small conference room. Grace locked the door while Owen pulled out his notebook. Lily sat down heavily in a chair, looking like she hadn't slept in days. There were dark circles under her eyes and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Start from the beginning," Owen said, his voice kind but firm. "Tell us everything." Lily took a shaky breath. "I didn't know who I really was until 6 months ago. My mother raised me alone, never talked about her past. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. Different towns, different names. I thought she was just running from a bad relationship or something. I never questioned it." Grace poured some water from the pitcher on the conference table and handed it to Lily. The young woman drank gratefully before continuing. "Mom got sick last year, cancer. By the time they found it, there was nothing they could do. In the hospital, right at the end, she finally told me the truth. She said her real name was Victoria Ashworth. She said her family was dangerous, that her uncle had tried to kill her when she was 25. She ran away pregnant with me and spent 30 years hiding. Why would her uncle want to kill her?" Grace asked. "Money. The Ashworth fortune is worth over $50 million. My mother inherited everything when her parents died. The estate, the investments, everything. But her Uncle Robert wanted it for himself. He tried to make it look like an accident. She found out and ran before he could finish what he started." Owen was taking notes quickly. "Did she have proof of this?" "That book," Lily said, pointing to the leather volume on the table. "My mother kept it her whole life. It's more than just a family tree. Hidden in those pages are documents proving who really owns what. There are letters, bank records, property deeds. Everything needed to prove I'm the legitimate heir." Grace carefully opened the book again, looking at it with new eyes. She'd been so focused on the family history that she hadn't thought to look for hidden documents. Now, as she examined each page more carefully, she started to see it. Thin papers tucked between pages, sometimes 3 or 4 layers deep, folded documents in pockets sewn into the binding. "My mother made me promise to protect my daughter," Lily continued. "She said Robert would come after us once he found out she was dead. And she was right. 2 weeks after the funeral, strange things started happening. Someone broke into my apartment but didn't steal anything. Just went through my papers. Then my car had brake problems that the mechanic said looked suspicious. Last week I saw a man following me. Same guy 3 days in a row. Did you go to the police? Owen asked. And tell them what? That my mother, who lived under a fake name for 30 years, said her rich uncle was trying to kill me. I had no proof of anything. Mom said I needed to go to the library to find someone who understood old records. She said to leave the baby somewhere safe with the book. She said a librarian would figure it out. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. The trust Victoria had placed in a stranger, in the simple idea that someone who worked with books and history would care enough to dig deeper. It was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Where have you been staying? Owen asked Lily. Different motels. Paying cash. I've been moving every 2 days. But I'm running out of money and I'm exhausted. I can't keep doing this, her voice cracked. I just want my daughter back. I want her to be safe. Owen stood up. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm calling in some help. If what you're saying is true, we need to get you somewhere secure, and we need to take a very close look at Robert Ashworth. While Owen stepped out to make phone calls, Grace sat with Lily and the book. Together, they started carefully removing the hidden documents. There were dozens of them. Old letters from the 1990s where Robert Ashworth wrote to lawyers, asking about ways to declare his niece dead. Bank statements showing he'd been slowly draining estate accounts. Most damning of all, there was a letter from a private investigator Robert had hired, detailing Victoria's movements in the weeks before she disappeared. He was tracking her, Grace said, reading the investigator's report. This man followed your mother for months. He knew where she went, who she talked to. This is evidence of stalking, maybe even conspiracy. Lily wiped her eyes. Mom said he would stop at nothing. The Ashworth family has always been like this. She told me there was a curse, that every generation, someone in the family destroyed someone else for money and power. It's been going on for hundreds of years. Grace thought about the dark entries she'd seen in the family history. The sudden deaths, the disappearances. Maybe it wasn't a curse. Maybe it was just greed happening over and over again. Owen came back with news. I've got FBI agents coming. They're very interested in this case. Apparently, there have been other reports about wealthy families using intimidation to control inheritances. They want to talk to you, Lily, and they want to see everything in that book. Over the next few hours, the small conference room filled with people, FBI agents, Child Protective Services, even a lawyer who specialized in estate law. Everyone was examining the book, taking photos of documents, making copies of everything. The estate lawyer, an older woman named Helen Rodriguez, was particularly interested. She put on reading glasses and went through every page methodically. This is extraordinary, she said. These documents would absolutely hold up in court. Victoria Ashworth never gave up her rights to the estate. She just went into hiding. That means legally she was still the owner until her death, and her daughter Lily inherited everything the moment Victoria died. But Robert has been managing the estate for years, Owen said. Illegally, Helen replied. He claimed his niece was dead without proof. He's been acting as executor of an estate that wasn't his to manage. This could mean criminal charges on top of civil liability. One of the FBI agents, a man named Peterson, was on his phone constantly. Finally, he hung up and addressed the room. We've been investigating Robert Ashworth's finances. In the past 6 months, he's made some very interesting transactions. Large cash withdrawals, payments to a security company that doesn't seem to exist. And here's the kicker. 3 weeks ago, he purchased a one-way ticket to Switzerland. He's planning to run, Owen said. Looks like it. We need to move fast. Grace watched all of this happening around her, feeling like she'd stepped into a movie. This morning, she'd been shelving books. Now she was in the middle of a case involving attempted murder, fraud, and a multi-million-dollar fortune. Lily grabbed her hand. Can I see my baby, please? I just need to know she's really okay. The woman from Child Services, who'd been making calls in the corner, came over. We can arrange a visit. Given the circumstances and with Detective Chen's approval, we can bring her here. It'll take about an hour. Those were the longest 60 minutes of Lily's life. Grace stayed with her, both of them nervous and excited. They went through more of the book together, finding Victoria's notes hidden in the margins, messages to her daughter, instructions, warnings about Robert, but also hopeful things, dreams she'd had for Lily's future, wishes that someday her granddaughter might grow up free from fear. When the social worker finally arrived with the baby, Lily burst into tears. She held her daughter close, whispering promises that everything would be okay now. The infant looked peaceful, content, like she knew she was back where she belonged. Grace felt her own eyes filling with tears. She stepped back, giving them space. But Lily reached out and grabbed her hand. "Thank you," she said. "My mother was right about you. She said librarians were the keepers of truth. She said if anyone would help us, it would be someone who spent their life protecting stories." Grace didn't know what to say. She just squeezed Lily's hand and nodded. Owen was back on his phone and his expression had changed. He looked worried. He came over to Grace and spoke quietly. "We've got a problem. Robert Ashworth's condo is empty. His car is gone. A neighbor says he left 2 hours ago with several suitcases." "He knows," Grace said. "Someone must have told him Lily came here. We've got alerts out at the airport and train station. But Grace, I need you to think. Is there anywhere in this library someone could hide? Any way someone could have been listening to us?" Grace felt cold. The library was old, full of hidden corners and back rooms. During the confusion this morning with the police and reporters, could someone have slipped in? Could they have been hiding here all day listening? She thought about the building's layout. The basement, rarely used. The attic, storage. The tunnels that connected the library to the old courthouse next door, left over from Prohibition days. No one used those tunnels anymore. They were supposed to be sealed up. "The tunnels," she said suddenly. "There are old tunnels under the building. They come up in several places. If someone knew about them, they could get in without being seen." Owen's face went pale. "Show me. Now." They left Lily with the FBI agents and the baby locked safely in the conference room. Grace led Owen down to the basement, through a storage area filled with old furniture and boxes of outdated books. At the very back, behind a tall shelf, was a door. It had a padlock on it, but the padlock was hanging open. Owen pulled out his gun. "Stay behind me," he whispered. He eased the door open. Beyond it was darkness and the smell of damp earth. Someone had been here recently. Grace could see footprints in the dust. Footprints that led back into the tunnel, toward the courthouse, or toward the library itself. Owen spoke into his radio, calling for backup. But even as he did, Grace heard something that made her blood run cold. Upstairs in the library, someone was screaming. It was Lily. Grace and Owen raced up the basement stairs. The screaming had stopped, which somehow made it worse. Owen had his gun drawn, speaking urgently into his radio for backup. Grace's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. They burst through the basement door into the main library. Everything looked normal at first. Then Grace saw the conference room door was standing open. The FBI agents were in the hallway, guns drawn, surrounding someone. As Grace got closer, she saw an elderly man in an expensive suit standing with his hands raised. He looked furious rather than afraid. "This is a mistake," the man was saying loudly. "I have every right to speak with my own niece." "Robert Ashworth," Owen said, moving forward. "You need to come with us." Robert glared at him. "On what charges?" "I've done nothing wrong. That girl in there has been brainwashed by her mother's paranoid delusions." Inside the conference room, Lily was clutching her baby, backed into a corner. The social worker was trying to calm her down. When Lily saw Grace, she called out, "He was in the library. He's been here the whole time listening to everything." Robert laughed bitterly. "I have every right to be in a public library. When I heard about the abandoned baby this morning, I wanted to see for myself. I had no idea it was connected to my family until I overheard the conversation." "You were hiding in the tunnels," Owen said. It wasn't a question. "I was exploring a historic building. The tunnel door was open. I've broken no laws." Agent Peterson stepped forward. "Mr. Ashworth, we'd like to ask you some questions about your financial activities related to the Ashworth estate." "Talk to my lawyer," Robert snapped. But Grace could see his confidence slipping. His eyes kept darting to the book that still sat on the conference table. "He wanted it. Needed it? That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Grace said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. She walked to the table and picked up the book. "This book is the proof. Proof that you've been stealing from your own family for 30 years. Robert's face turned red. "That book is Ashworth family property. It belongs to me as the senior surviving member of the family." "No," Lily said, her voice stronger now. "It belonged to my mother. She's the one who kept our real history alive. You just wanted to erase us so you could take everything." Helen Rodriguez, the estate lawyer, had been studying the documents they'd pulled from the book. Now she spoke up. "Mr. Ashworth, I've reviewed the evidence here. There are clear records showing that Victoria Ashworth maintained ownership of the estate until her death. Your claim as executor was fraudulent. You'll need to account for every penny you've managed over the past 30 years. Robert's composure finally cracked. You don't understand what it was like. My brother got everything. Edward inherited the estate just because he was born first. I worked my whole life for this family, and what did I get? Nothing. Then Edward died, and that spoiled girl Victoria got it all. A 20-year-old with no idea how to manage money. She would have destroyed everything our family built. So you tried to kill her, Owen said flatly. I never tried to kill anyone, Robert shouted. I just wanted what should have been mine from the start. When Victoria ran away, it was her choice. She abandoned her responsibilities. After you sabotaged her car, Agent Peterson said, holding up his phone. We pulled the police report from 1995. Victoria reported that her brakes had been cut. She filed a report naming you as a suspect, but the investigation was dropped. Why was that, Mr. Ashworth? Robert said nothing, but his lawyer spoke up for the first time, a thin man who'd been standing quietly in the corner. My client will not be answering any questions without proper legal representation. That's fine, Peterson said. We have enough to bring him in for questioning regarding fraud and embezzlement. The attempted murder charge can wait. As the FBI agents moved to escort Robert out, he suddenly lunged toward the table, trying to grab the book. Owen stepped in front of him, and for a moment Grace thought the old man might actually attack the detective. But Robert stopped himself, breathing hard, glaring at Lily with pure hatred. That child doesn't belong to you, he hissed. She's an Ashworth. She belongs to the family legacy, not to some girl who doesn't even know her own name. Her name is Lily, Grace said firmly, and that baby belongs with her mother. They took Robert away. The library felt quieter once he was gone, but the tension remained. Lily sat down heavily, still holding her daughter close. Grace brought her some water and sat next to her. Is it really over? Lily asked. Owen shook his head. Not yet. We still need to prove what Robert did, and that's going to take time and evidence. Helen Rodriguez, however, was smiling. The legal case is actually quite strong. With the documents in this book, we can prove Victoria never relinquished her claim. That makes Lily the rightful heir. As for Robert's criminal activities, that's not my area, but I'd say the FBI has plenty to work with. Over the next few hours, they documented everything. Photographs of every page in the book, statements from Lily about her mother's death and the threats she'd experienced. The FBI agents were particularly interested in the private investigator's report they'd found. That man was being tracked down for questioning, too. By evening, the library was finally clearing out. Lily had been set up in a safe house with her baby. Child Protective Services agreed that under police protection, the baby could stay with her mother. Grace felt exhausted but relieved. She was looking up for the night when Owen came to find her. He'd changed out of his suit jacket and looked as tired as she felt. You did good today, he said. I just found a baby. You did all the real work. No, Owen said seriously. You understood what that book meant. You saw the bigger picture. Without you, Lily might have given up. Robert might have gotten away with it. Grace thought about that. Victoria knew what she was doing when she told Lily to go to a library. She trusted that someone would care enough to look deeper, that someone would see this wasn't just about money or property. It was about family, about truth. They stood there quietly for a moment. Then Owen asked, "What happens to the book now?" "It's evidence. But eventually it should go to Lily. It's her family history. Her daughter's history." Grace paused. "Though I'd love to make a copy for the library archives. This is an incredible piece of local history. I think that can be arranged." As Grace finally walked to her car, she looked back at the old library building. This morning it had been just her workplace, familiar and predictable. Now it felt different, important, like it had been waiting all these years for Victoria's daughter to walk through its doors. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The story made national news. Hidden heiress found after 30-year mystery. Robert Ashworth was formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The attempted murder charge was harder to prove, but the financial crimes alone were enough to ensure he'd spend years in prison. Lily worked with Helen Rodriguez to establish her legal claim to the estate. The process was complicated, but the documents from Victoria's book made it possible. DNA tests confirmed that Lily was Victoria's daughter, and that the baby was Lily's child, making her the legitimate fourth-generation Ashworth heir. Grace visited Lily several times during this period. They'd formed an unexpected friendship. Lily said it felt like having an older sister, someone who understood what she'd been through. Grace helped her research the family history, filling in the gaps that Victoria hadn't been able to explain before she died. They discovered the full extent of the Ashworth family's dark history. Generation after generation, there had been fights over money and property, brothers turning against brothers, parents disinheriting children. The curse Lily's mother had talked about was just greed and fear, passed down like a disease. "I don't want that for my daughter," Lily said one afternoon. They were sitting in Grace's office at the library, going through old newspaper articles. The baby, whom Lily had named Victoria Grace, was sleeping peacefully in a carrier between them. "Then you break the cycle," Grace said simply. "You teach her that people matter more than money. That family is about love, not property." Lily smiled. "Mom tried to do that. She gave up everything to keep me safe. She lived in cheap apartments and worked minimum wage jobs, all so I could grow up normal. Happy. And I was. I didn't know we were poor because we were running from millions of dollars. I just knew my mom loved me." Grace felt her throat tighten. She sounds like she was an amazing person. She was. "And you know what? She was right about librarians." Lily laughed, wiping her eyes. "She said you were the keepers of truth. People who understand that stories matter, that history matters, that the truth is worth protecting even when it's dangerous." "I'm just glad I could help," Grace said. "You did more than help. You saved us." A few days later, Lily came to the library with an interesting proposal. She'd been meeting with lawyers and financial advisors about the estate. The manor house could be restored. The investments could be managed properly. The Ashworth fortune could be put to good use. "I want to turn the manor into something meaningful," Lily said. "A community center maybe, or a museum. Something that helps people instead of just sitting there empty. And I want to fund a genealogy research center. People should be able to know their family histories without it costing thousands of dollars." "That's a wonderful idea," Grace said. "And I want you to run it. The research center, I mean. You'd be the director. We could move your whole rare books collection there, make it available to anyone who wants to research their family." Grace was stunned. "Lily, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, please. I need someone I trust. Someone who understands what this is really about. It's not about the Ashworth name or the money. It's about preserving truth, protecting stories. Isn't that what you've been doing your whole career?" Grace looked around her small library office. She'd worked here for 8 years. It was comfortable, familiar, safe. But maybe safe wasn't enough anymore. Maybe Victoria Ashworth had taught her something important when she left that baby in the genealogy section. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that challenge us, that push us to be more than we thought we could be. "I need to think about it," Grace said, but she was already imagining the possibilities. 6 months later, Grace stood in front of Ashworth Manor for the first time. The house was enormous, 3 stories of stone and wood that had seen better days. Ivy covered most of the walls. Several windows were broken. The grounds were overgrown with weeds and wild bushes. But underneath all the decay, Grace could see the beauty. This place had been built with care, meant to last for generations. A construction crew was already at work, replacing the roof and fixing the foundation. Lily had hired a historical restoration company to bring the manor back to its original glory, while updating it with modern safety features. The project would take at least a year, but Lily was patient. She said her mother had waited 30 years to see justice done. They could wait a little longer to do things right. "What do you think?" Lily asked, walking up beside Grace. Baby Victoria was strapped to her chest in a carrier, chewing on a teething ring and watching everything with bright, curious eyes. "It's incredible," Grace said honestly. "Your ancestors built something beautiful here." "Yeah, and then they spent 200 years fighting over it." Lily smiled sadly. "But maybe we can change that story. Make this place about bringing people together instead of tearing them apart." They walked through the construction zone, hard hats on, stepping over lumber and tools. Inside, the manor was a mix of destruction and promise. Old wallpaper hung in strips. Floorboards were being replaced. But the bones of the house were solid. High ceilings with original molding, a grand staircase that curved up to the second floor, huge windows that would let in beautiful light once they were fixed. The ballroom on the first floor would become the main research center. Lily's architects had drawn up plans for climate-controlled rooms to house the rare books and documents. Computer stations for people to access genealogy databases, private rooms where families could meet with researchers. And at the center of it all, displayed in a protective case, would be the Ashworth family book that had started everything. "People need to see it," Lily had said when they were planning. "Not locked away in a safe somewhere, but visible. A reminder that every family has a story worth preserving." Grace had finally accepted the job as director of the Ashworth Genealogy Research Center. It had been a hard decision to leave the public library, but her boss had been understanding. He'd even agreed to a partnership where the library's collection would be housed at the manor, but remain accessible to the public. Everyone won. The restoration work continued through the summer and fall. Grace visited the manor every week, watching it transform. The roof was fixed, windows replaced. The grounds were cleared and landscaped. Slowly, the house began to look like it might have in 1900, when the Ashworth family was at its peak. During this time, Robert Ashworth went on trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty of fraud and embezzlement. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and ordered to repay over $8 million he'd stolen from the estate. His lawyer tried to argue that he'd been managing the property in good faith, but the private investigator's report proved otherwise. Robert had known Victoria was alive. He'd tracked her movements for years, always ready to strike if she tried to reclaim what was hers. Grace attended the trial to support Lily. On the day of the sentencing, Robert looked at his niece across the courtroom. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You don't know how to handle this kind of wealth. You'll destroy everything the family built?" Lily stood up, holding baby Victoria. "No, Uncle Robert. You destroyed it. You made our family name mean greed and violence. I'm going to make it mean something better. I'm going to make my daughter proud of where she comes from." Robert had no response to that. As they led him away, Grace saw something in his face. Not regret exactly, but maybe the first hint of understanding that he'd lost more than just money and freedom. He'd lost his family's respect, their legacy, their story, and that was something no amount of money could buy back. By spring, 1 year after Grace had found the baby, Ashworth Manor was ready. The grand opening of the Ashworth Genealogy Research Center was scheduled for a sunny Saturday in May. Hundreds of people came. Local historians, families interested in researching their ancestry, reporters, and curious townspeople who'd followed the story in the news. Grace gave a speech standing on the manor's front steps. She talked about the importance of knowing where we come from, understanding our family histories, both the good and the bad. She talked about Victoria Ashworth, a woman who'd given up everything to protect her daughter. And she talked about Lily, who'd turned tragedy and fear into something hopeful. "This building has seen a lot of darkness," Grace said. "Generations of people fighting over property and money, hurting each other in the name of family legacy. But today we're changing that story. Today, this house becomes a place where all families, not just the wealthy ones, can discover and preserve their histories. Where everyone's story matters." The crowd applauded. Lily stood next to Grace, tears running down her face. Baby Victoria, now a year old and walking, tugged on her mother's hand, wanting to explore. After the ceremony, people toured the manor. The research center was beautiful. Grace and her small staff had worked for months to organize everything. The rare books from the library were carefully shelved. Computers were set up with access to genealogy databases. There were comfortable chairs for reading and desks for taking notes. Everything felt both professional and welcoming. The Ashworth family book had its own display in the entrance hall. People gathered around it, reading the story of how Grace had found it with the abandoned baby, how it had revealed a family secret that had been hidden for 30 years. The display included photos of Victoria Ashworth, both as a young woman and in later years, taken from the few pictures Lily had. There was dignity in how the story was told, respect for the woman who'd sacrificed everything for her child. Owen Chen came to the opening, bringing his wife and 2 kids. He and Grace had stayed in touch throughout the year. He'd been promoted to sergeant after the Ashworth case, recognition for his good police work. "You did it," he said to Grace as they watched people explore the research center. "You took something terrible and made it beautiful." "Lily did that," Grace corrected. "I just helped. Don't sell yourself short. You're the one who understood what that book meant. You saw past the mystery to the real story, the human story." Grace smiled. "I guess that's what librarians do. We look for the truth in the pages." As the day wore on, Grace found herself standing alone in the ballroom-turned research center, The sun was setting outside the tall windows, casting golden light across the shelves of books. She thought about how strange life was. A year ago, she'd been living a quiet, predictable existence. Then one morning, she'd found a baby and everything changed. "Thank you," a voice said behind her. Grace turned to see Lily standing there, Victoria asleep on her shoulder. The little girl had gotten tired from all the excitement. "For what?" Grace asked. "For seeing us. For caring. You could have just called the police and walked away. But you didn't. You understood that my mother was trying to tell a story and you listened." Grace walked over and gently touched the sleeping child's head. "I'm glad I did. You two have changed my life too, you know. I was stuck in a routine doing the same things every day. You reminded me why I became a librarian in the first place. Because stories matter. History matters. People matter." They stood there together as the sun set, two women connected by an old book and a newborn baby, by secrets revealed and truths protected. Over the next few months, the research center thrived. People came from all over the state to use the resources. Grace hired 2 more staff members to handle the demand. They helped families trace their ancestry, find lost relatives, understand their heritage. Every day brought new stories, new connections. One afternoon, an elderly woman came in looking for information about her grandmother. Grace helped her search through old census records and found the connection she was looking for. The woman started crying, overwhelmed with emotion. "I never knew where my family came from," she said. "My grandmother died when I was young. I always felt like part of my history was missing. But now I know. Thank you. These moments made everything worthwhile." Grace understood now what Victoria Ashworth had been trying to protect. Not just money or property, but identity. The right to know who you are and where you come from. The right to your own story. Lily often brought Victoria to visit the research center. The little girl loved being in the big house, running down the long hallways, playing in the rooms that had once belonged to her ancestors. She had no idea yet what her great-grandmother had done to keep her safe, what her mother had risked to give her a better life. But someday she would know. The story was preserved now, protected in the very book that had revealed it. On the 1-year anniversary of the day Grace found the baby, they held a small private celebration. Just Grace, Lily, Owen and his family, Helen Rodriguez, and a few other people who'd been part of the journey. They gathered in the manor's restored dining room and shared a meal together. "To Victoria Ashworth," Lily said, raising her glass, "who taught us that protecting your family is more important than any fortune." "To Grace," Owen added, "who proved that sometimes the most important thing you can do is care about a stranger's story." "And to second chances," Grace said, looking around the table at this unlikely group of friends. "May we all have the courage to change our family stories for the better." They clinked glasses and laughed and told stories late into the evening. Baby Victoria toddled from person to person, bringing them toys and demanding attention. She was loved, protected and surrounded by people who would make sure she grew up knowing her value had nothing to do with her last name or her inheritance. Later, as Grace was leaving, she stopped in the entrance hall to look at the Ashworth book one more time. Behind the protective glass, it looked ancient and mysterious. But Grace knew better now. It wasn't mysterious at all. It was just a family's history, recorded with care over hundreds of years. Some parts were beautiful. Some parts were dark. But it was all true, and truth was worth protecting.